Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? Or good evening. I'm your host, Joshua the Void, and tonight we're going to have a fantastic conversation. But before we go into that, I really want to thank our Patreon supporters, Dion LaShay, Linear, and also, one second. What is happening here? My apologies. And Calasia for coming and supporting our show. So thank you very much for supporting us. Also, I would like to thank everybody who's in the comments section right now for coming on in and really engaging in the comment section. So I really do appreciate it. You guys are amazing. So thank you. Oh, that's true. Oh my god, I can't believe I messed that up. Right, Promethean secular uprising. Bada bing. That's how it goes. DS Whiplash, how are you doing? Welcome to the show. So, without further ado, today's show is something that me and my good friend Scott Williamson definitely don't agree on. But before we delve into that, I am going to let I, oh, right. So let me let in beforehand Scott Williamson. Scott Williamson, how are you doing, my man?
Hey, what's going on, brother? Glad to be here,
Ah,
man. Been looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to this conversation too. This conversation I've been really hoping to have, and I think that it's going to definitely help individuals check out the two perspectives, both of our perspectives.
hmm
And I think that's what's really a beneficial thing about this conversation because everybody can take a different approach to it. I take a more hardliner approach, and you take more of an accommodation approach. So I think through our discussion, we're definitely going to see how this is going to unfold. But
Oh yeah.
before we do that, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I was just on a podcast earlier with Isaiah. You met Isaiah last night,
Yes, I
and
did.
we were
Yes.
talking about echo chambers.
Ah,
How do you know when you're in danger of being in an echo chamber? How can you fight against being in an echo chamber? What are the positives, if any, of being part of an echo chamber versus the negatives? And so we sort of talked about the entire.
what's going on, everybody? Hold on. Am I the only one that can't hear Scott Williamson at the moment? I just
Uh,
wanted. Okay, there you go. I think you're back.
okay, good, good, good. Yeah, I'm having some connection problems over here. So, but anyways, yeah, and this was really kind of like a primer for this conversation.
Right.
So, this is part of my perspective. It has to do a lot with that. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Linear, could you hear him? Could you hear him now? I can't hear him either. Like, could you hear Scott Williamson at the moment? Just want to make sure before we move on that I don't want to have people that can't hear us, and I'm only having a monologue in a sense.
right. Uh,
Oh no, you broke up again. Oh, okay, perfect, perfect. Thank you, thank you. So 1 second, 1 second. I think Scott Williamson is going to be back relatively soon, hopefully. But yes, so what we're going to end up doing is we're going to be talking about skepticism and spiritualism. Are they compatible with each other, or are they ir- can they not exist beside each other? That's the whole entire thing. Can we look at a spiritualistic approach and say that this makes sense, or can we look as skeptics and look at a spiritual approach and say that skepticism does not uh is not part of? Oh no, he lost his connection again. Okay, it's all good. So I'll just continue with the conversation until he comes back, and hopefully his internet connection will be much better. So I come from a position where I think that they're irreconcilable. spiritualism and skepticism are irreconcilable beside each other. There's just no possible way that they can work in tandem with each other. Because, and I'll delve into that later. And Scott Williamson is of the approach that that they are reconcilable, that they are able to be in tandem with each other. So it's going to be really interesting to delve into this conversation. I only hope that his connection can stay strong as the conversation goes forward. And another thing that I would like to say too is that this is the first time that it's not my internet connection which is messing up. So that's good. That's good. So before anything, Dion LaShay, how are you doing, my man? And also, DS Whiplash, welcome to the show. If you have any if you have anything that you have to ask or anything like that, please do hit me up with questions. If you don't agree with what I'm saying, throw those curveballs at me. Don't worry about it. I love when people do that. And who else? Who else? Linear, absolutely linear. What is happening? Oh, okay. He's rebooting his Wi-Fi. So when he's done rebooting it, he'll come back in and we'll start the conversation again. Sorry about that, everybody who's waiting in the comment section. And Borg Skeptic, how are you doing? I'm so happy to see you inside the comment sections as well. It's been a long time. We've actually talked yesterday on Scott Williamson's show, but I think that today it's going to be a really cool discussion. So if you're still here, that's going to be really cool. Also, everybody, we're having an after party after this. So at around 8 o'clock or 8:15, we're going to start an after party. And if you want to join us in the conversation, and let's just say you disagree with me full-heartedly, come on to the channel and disagree with me. You know, let's have that conversation. Let's have that discussion, because that is what this channel is all about. Discussions in and of themselves. Al H, how are you doing, my man? Welcome to the show. Glad to see you. And as I stated, if you want to come into onto the show afterwards on the after party and discuss, is spiritualism and skepticism, are they reconcilable or irreconcilable, please come on through and we'll have a great discussion. But I'm happy to see you. I think that it's fantastic. We didn't necessarily see eye to eye yesterday, but we can bring that up afterwards in the after party. I think that's going to be really good to discuss again. But all in all, hopefully Scott comes through. But as I stated, I think there's a lot of issues with spiritualism, because spiritualism in and of itself is an idea that still utilizes certain, how can I say it? It still utilizes the concepts that religions utilize, right? But they're kind of like religion on a lesser scale. So it's sort of like the chakras, for instance. The chakras are not aligned properly. So I need to meditate in order to realign the chakras properly, to open up the paths to full consciousness and stuff like that, right? Or at least that's my definition of spiritualism. Maybe when Scott Williamson returns, he might disagree completely with me. Maybe you guys might disagree completely with me, and you could come into the after party afterwards and tear apart my entire freaking argument and be like, look, this is what I think spiritualism is. And I think you're completely and absolutely wrong based on your conception of it. And that's going to be awesome too. Scott Williamson is back. Let's go.
Hey,
Welcome.
sorry about that. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Oh, good. Yeah, I had to reboot everything because connection issues. But yeah, man. So let's get to it, man. Let's get to it, man.
All right. So, what is your position when you look at spiritualism and skepticism? Why do you think that they're reconcilable towards each other? Why do you think they can work in tandem with each other and they're not, like how I see it, irreconcilable? That skepticism and spiritualism will always be in a clash with each other. Why do you think that?
So again, spiritualism is, I think it's kind of like a worldview, like a religion. Spirituality is a little different than spiritualism.
Okay.
So I just want to make that distinction. I'm not promoting spiritualism because that's like the belief souls and supernatural kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
So spirituality is a lot different. It comes from a different place. So, you know, like you can think of it in, say, three ways, right? Like the first is like an expanded sociobiology of, say, belonging, like the desire for connectedness. And that extends to like the natural world or even the cosmos itself, this idea of oneness, right?
Hmm.
Now, the second is our yearning to be more to life than just death itself, right?
Okay.
So this is the idea of transcending physical reality in some way. And
Right.
so the other one is viewing being bogged down with beliefs and narratives, like believing in some ego self as something that's really real. you know so when you view, and there's a way that I get to these and explain these, but in my experience, by living these out the way that I'm talking about, this idea of spirituality, it can be about connection, continuity, contemplating, all without losing reason, without requiring belief in souls, destiny, energy, and other dubious sort of concepts. So that's what I'm talking about spirituality, because this is sort of in line with, say, secular humanism that has the
Interesting.
same goal. The
Hmm.
goal is to kind of be connected to one another, to kind of have an emotional motivation for it,
Okay.
um, and to be, and not to lose reason, but also not to get too attached to beliefs and ego and the self and these sort of things. There's a benefit to that. Sam Harris talks a lot about that.
Okay.
And the other thing I want to say is that there's no rules to it. So in other words, the other thing about spirituality, a teaching that I embrace, is that it's not for everybody. It's
Right.
only for those who, if you don't need it, it's not for you. So
Correct.
so that's the number one thing. And this is because of another spiritual teaching that I'm holding,
Okay.
is that your perception of reality is a projection of your understanding of reality, right? So it kind of gets into the Anil Seth philosophy that he talks about, like this controlled hallucination that we have in life, right? And so this is where we get things like meaning. It's where we get a lot of these concepts that are really valuable, and they come from evolution. They come from nature. This stuff isn't just made up out of a vacuum. Like we were talking last night about, like, that microbiologist, Michael Levin, in his work about we're just an emergent, the consciousness is kind of emerging from other physical interactions that we're not even aware of. They're doing their own thing
Absolutely.
too, right?
Absolutely. But I do want to push back
Yeah,
on certain
sure,
aspects and certain points
sure.
because you were stating that spiritualism is different from spirituality in and of itself. So you're stating that spiritualism is more believing in the spirit, believing in something that is transcendent, correct? Something that is above yourself in and of itself. If I understood that correctly.
Like, maybe and maybe not. Like, in a sense that even in science we have the concept of uber natural.
Hmm.
Not necessarily supernatural, but something that's above what we know to be true. Like, I think that's the whole idea of science, is to understand that. Like, we don't know everything. So let's start saying we don't know and then start exploring it. And so we've kind of explored a lot about the natural world. We're at the point where we can define the limits of what we can measure in the natural world. So now we talk about what's beyond the natural world. And in religious language, that might be called supernatural. But in more scientific language, it might be called ubernatural, like maybe a metaverse, maybe like extended material, maybe something like metatime,
Oh, right,
You
right. But
know,
I think too that sometimes because we want to know certain things, right? So we want to give certain criteria to the things that are beyond what we already know so far. So we try to speculate things that are beyond our common knowledge as now. And I do think that that is healthy within science in and of itself, and let alone healthy within philosophy. But I think that if we jump, and that's the thing that when I look at spirituality, for instance, I think that's what it does is that it makes the jump without the evidence. It makes
oh
the
yeah,
jump.
that is a good point you bring up. That is a product of religion.
Hmm.
Religion is based on spirituality, and that's why the two concepts are looked at as um, the same thing. They're conflated, right? And
Right.
so what we have is people dismissing spiritual values, like you throw the baby out with the bathwater, because we've let religion monopolize the conversation and the language revolving around religious teachings and things of that nature. And and it's good to the way I'm defining it. And there's a good quote down here by deist Whiplash. He says psychology equals atheist spirituality, most obvious so where Carl Jung is concerned. Exactly. So that's what I was saying. The language, I could easily replace out the word spirituality with my psychology, and
Oh,
we'd be talking about the same thing pretty much for the most part. The only difference is spirituality is um it's not just about feelings, but it's also about exploration. It's about experience. It's any kind of depth into the mind, basically, you know?
right. But I would also state too that I think if there's already a word for it, for instance, if
Hmm.
the better word, let's just say, is psychology, then shouldn't we utilize the better word in order to actually understand what we're talking about instead of using the ambiguous word that has so much baggage on top of it, such as spirituality in and of itself?
Yeah, that's the argument that Sam Harris had with why hold on to the language spiritual. And basically, I think what he's saying is, I kind of sort of agree with this, is that spirituality encompasses a lot of psychology, if not all of it, but also other things as well. There's other practices that aren't, you know, you don't go to psychology and get into meditation, for example. You don't get into psychology and learn about, the deeper questions, the interconnectedness at a deeper level. Those are sort of concepts that sort of border on philosophy and our opinions or our outlook, like subjective outlooks on things, right? But that's what's in common with the psychological part of it. But it's also an exploration in itself. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I see what you're stating, but I feel that in and of itself, because even though that it is based on experiences, is based on experiences which could be just like how we discussed beforehand, even on last night's show, based on hallucinations or quasi hallucinations in and of
Mm-hmm.
themselves, right? And henceforth, could we literally say that these experiences are experiences that are of the real in and of itself, right? Since if you have to ingest something in order to feel that supposed presence or in order for you to go on that journey, then can we say that the very experience that we're having is based on tangible, real experiences? Or is it just everything that the mind has consumed so far within our existence is able to be released because the very fabric of consciousness and unconsciousness kind of starts to fade just a bit, allowing there to be more creativity that seeps into the conscious and gives us that very perception.
Right. And the point that I'm making is, like, when I'm sitting here listening to you talking, you're engaging in spirituality right now. At least in my understanding, or my usage of the word, you're engaging in spiritual questions and spiritual searching yourself when you're talking about consciousness, experience, explaining the ontology or explaining how things work. This is all part of it, right? That's what I'm getting at, is that to say, um, this particular group of skeptics or secularists, we don't have a part in that. And yet we go ahead and talk every day about spirituality, every day. Like, we have these conversations, we have these engagements. It's just that the way we're framing it is a reaction to the way religion has sort of imposed itself upon the word in our language, right?
Right, but wouldn't you say though that spirituality in and of itself was the very thing that birthed religions in and of themselves, right? Because individuals through their spirituality spoke of things that they didn't have evidence for. And through speaking of things that they didn't have evidence for, created ideas that then transcended the very idea based on the soul person who had that said spirituality, and henceforth created a religion through their explaining their spirituality to other people.
Yeah, that's really possible. And just like with morality, I would say that morality also led to religion. So, the ideals of religious morality didn't start after religion started. Religions weren't the first ones to say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or love your neighbor as yourself, the golden rule. Religions didn't invent that. That came before religion, just like spirituality did. But to throw out morality because it gave birth to religious teaching would be sort of crazy in a way. It would be sort of like looking at it from a certain kind of viewpoint, you know,
Right,
like a limited viewpoint at that, because if you think about the big picture,
right,
like we can connect natural evolution to spirituality and religion, like for as far as some of its purposes for people, and some of the, I guess I would say maybe not the purpose was, to de-stress about death, or fear of death or whatever like that.
right.
It could be like an offshoot, like an unintentional byproduct of religion was stuff like that. And so that's just how life is, you know what I mean? But I wouldn't say that that makes religion or spirituality invalid
I
any more
wouldn't
than
say
it.
that it's invalid, but what I'm stating is that it's certain aspects of it that lead out into the more or less what we can say uh, uh, um, evidence based or non evidence based
Yeah.
sort of aspects within spirituality, the aspect of the soul, the aspect of living beyond death or whatever the situation may be, people seeing things that then make their spirituality more in tune with the perspective of death, or death not being the final road, for instance, right?
Hmm.
So I can understand when people say, well, maybe, and it's true, we did have certain aspects and perspectives in our past that were based on our experiences and certain or psychological aspects or whatever, just like with postpartum hallucinations of
Hmm.
individuals who particularly died, but yet you can still hear them or whatever. You can still see them sometimes. You can still, with, which is weird, but even feel the particular person, no, not feel the person, but feel the touch of that particular person and stuff
Hmm.
like that. And the reality of it is that you've lived with this person for so long that your brain is coping with the loss of that individual. And how does it cope? At least when we look at psychology and how psychology tries to answer that
Hmm.
question, is by us sort of giving an abstraction to that individual, making it
Hmm.
seem that the spiritual realm, or let's just say something beyond death, is a real thing. But at the same time, when we really look at it with all its realizations, all it is the brain trying to understand that this individual is gone. you know.
Right. There's like a well evidenced theory within terror management theory. Within psychology, it's called terror management theory.
Okay.
And what it posits is that our self awareness comes with a steep cost, like our intelligence and our self awareness. The realization of death is sort of inevitable for us, right?
Hmm.
So, like, while another animal doesn't think about these things, um, they're just primed to respond intermittently to threats and things of that nature, and they just escape threats sort of by, just built-in. What's the word for it? They just do it automatically. They fly on automatic. We, on the other hand, as humans, we have existential dread. So, according to terror management theory, the
Hmm.
buffer is our belief in symbolic immortality achieved through like cultural participation. There's
Hmm.
like symbolic ways to live on within the cultural framework, like through our
Oh, definitely.
children, good deeds, our work, our charity, art, music, writing, how we treat each other every day when we see
Absolutely.
people, because we know we're going to die and we know that we want to mean something in this life right now. That's engaging in spirituality. So these sort of cultural creations are not really eternal, but they are more long lasting than our individual lives themselves. So that's one way that you could be, say, spiritual minded about, towards immortality in some kind of way.
I
Doesn't
see.
necessarily like because it goes hand in hand with the other problem. The other problem is holding on to beliefs and clinging to identity and ego. Well, the reason why we want to accept that death is inevitable and it's okay is
Right.
because we want to understand the nature of who we really are. We're not um this thing. The self isn't this thing out there. It's a process, you know.
I see. It is an amalgamation of processes that give form to the self.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But the thing that I'm also trying to state, because I do agree that in certain aspects we want to live beyond the self. So how do we do that? We create art. We create great structures and put our names on those particular structures in order to be remembered
Right.
even after when we're gone. We do heroic deeds such as Alexander the Great or Caesar in order to be remembered for almost until writing ceases to exist, or until all books on Alexander and Caesar are burnt and gone and everything like that. But
And I
the aspect that I'm looking at here is that it's understandable because people are very egotistical and they want to
Mhm.
live beyond the self.
Mhm.
But the one
Mhm.
thing that I would say is that that is not necessarily like I don't think that that in and of itself is a spiritual act. That is just a behavioral aspect of a particular being wanting to be free of the shackles of, let's just say,
Mortality, you know.
mortality.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Well,
it's kind of
see,
like how Achilles,
right.
how Achilles' mother stated to Achilles before he went to Troy, for instance, and fought in the Trojan War. He asked his mother that, what should I do? Should I stay here because this is not my war, or should I go to Troy? And his mother looked at him and stated, well, you can stay here and you can have kids and you'll have tons of beautiful children. But after, let's just say, 5 or 6 generations go by, you will be forgotten by those generations and stuff like that. And your name will be lost. But if you go to Troy, she stated, then you will be known throughout all of history and
Mhm.
for eternity in and of itself. And just the idea of that, I think, is predominantly the battle within people's minds based on what is something that they can leave behind, just like how you stated. But I don't think that that is a spiritual prospect, though. I think that's
Well,
just
no,
behavior.
no. It's what I'm saying is that that's part of what spiritual people do. Um, Not necessarily that it's true,
Okay.
or that it's even helpful to think that way. Like I was about to say that the deepest spiritual truth is that none of that matters. The deepest spiritual truth is that there is no self to really be worried about and anxious about. that it's all about letting go of all that stuff of the ego and understanding your nature. But part of that process is sort of like psychology. You know how you come to grips with your problem.
Mhm.
Everybody has this. We're inculcated by society to prop up our egos, and that facet of our humanity is seen everywhere in life. Politics, on the job, in sports, in any kind of competition, in religion, where people want to live forever, um, even in atheism, like with this transhumanism movement. People think that they have this religion where they worship technology and they want to live forever. That the same themes of religion are sort of adapted into sort of these secular religions. To say that they're not really spiritual, I could say that they're not true, or they're not really, maybe, like you said, they're kind of shallow minded, or they're kind of egocentric. It's the mind sort of fighting with itself rather than finding peace. And I think that's what the whole purpose of my spirituality, my understanding of spirituality, is to find peace, reality on its own terms, right? Not trying to create this immortality, this immortal solution, if you will, because that's just trying to preserve your ego, and that's
Right.
kind of against the whole spiritual, you know, imperative there.
Right, but I think that in and of itself, right, that when we're looking at, if we're delving into the ego and everything like that, I think that is definitely a spiritualistic way of looking at things.
Right.
Looking at the ego, separating oneself from the ego, and from that very instances, start to focus on well, that's the problem that I find with the ego, right? Or with ego spiritualistic talk, is that all it does is it goes around right back to the ego again. Because if
Well,
you're really
yeah, this
looking at it,
right.
you're looking at the self. You're trying to
Always
find your true self. And
right. That
that's the
right.
one thing, is that ego speak doesn't remove self, it reinforces self.
Right.
Because even if you leave self, you come right back to self. There's no actual separation of the self. It is, let's just say, the retransfiguration of the self, the realization about what really makes you you, or what makes your ideas sort of flow and understandable to you. But I
Mm-hmm.
think when we really delve into definitely these type of conversations, we can say that these are definitely metaphysical conversations. But I think the problem, and that's why I take more of a positivist view on things, is that at first I think that people start off with like spiritualistic thought process. That spiritualism grows into religion, then after it grows into metaphysics, and then it goes into scientism. And I think that people are all within their different aspects and prospects in their stages in and of itself. And I think that through really understanding sometimes the metaphysics, you can slowly but surely move into the final stages. At least that's how I see it, into scientism, where you can then formulate the way that the world is and how you feel, not using spiritualistic ambiguity, but literally pinpointing those specific things, such as within psychology, such as within physics, and all the rest of that, where you don't need the spiritual in order to describe these. Even like the sense of awe does not need to be described in a spiritualistic way. It's just the way that our emotions, and that's why I'm also Epicurean as well, to allow the emotions to fill you, like
Mm-hmm.
be that individual that doesn't restrict one's emotions when it comes to making an individual happy. Release those emotions, because that is the full extent of what humanity is supposed to do, but we're always hindered by society to release our emotions. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's it. That's why I'm such a behavioralist. When I look at behavioralism, it makes more sense to me than it does when I look at more spiritualistic aspects and stuff like that.
So what? There's certain questions we can ask,
Of course.
and the way we answer that depends on the tools we use. And sometimes we use the wrong tools to ask a certain question, right? Like, um, so for me, all spirituality really is just speaking about the same things in a different sort of language, in a
Right.
different sort of way. Um, but it's more all encompassing. And regardless of whether, and like I said before, I don't think it's necessarily a language that one has to pick out for themselves. Like maybe it's just totally all just meaningless. Like there's some people that are so stoic that they just don't care about, they would rather enjoy like focused on, say, their job or their career or their family or some other focus. Maybe they're a musician or an artist and that's their focus. And so for them, they don't really have room or need for this spiritual sort of thinking about deep concepts or anything like that. You know what I mean? But what I would say to that is that actually these people are simply too busy living out a spiritual life rather than contemplating a spiritual life, which is actually to me better, you know.
Interesting.
But just because I'm the way I am, I can't help but talk. It's part of what I like to do is talk about all kinds of concepts and philosophies and epistemology, things like that. But
Right.
what is meditation? For example, the spiritual practice is called meditation. Meditation is focus, and you can focus inwardly. You don't have to like empty out your thoughts and all that. You can just focus on your thoughts, and you can learn something by focusing on that, or you can at least get away and feel blissful for a little bit of time. Center yourself, balance yourself, then you can kind of return to reality in a more calm way, in a more balanced way with a higher perspective, right? That's the same thing that an athlete achieves when they're out there running, the marathon. They're in the flow state, you know. They're
Right.
out their mind time has disappeared. They're in a blissful state. If you're at work and you're really focused on what you're doing, time can fly away because you're so into your work. If you're an artist, same thing. Into your family, same thing. It's like whatever your focus is, that's your devotion. That's what the Buddhists call a devotion.
Mhm.
And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be closing your eyes, holding fucking candles or some shit. You know what I mean? Like that. There's no hard rules on that. And
Right.
that's a spiritual practice. So that sort of gets back to what you were just saying. That you know people can use different language to achieve the same thing or what, and that's fine. The language is irrelevant. You know, But I guess what I'm really saying is that we're all kind of engaged in some sort of what I think, in my
Mm.
opinion, and in my language. Maybe it doesn't translate, but we're all involved in this life journey, in
Oh,
this,
absolutely.
this sort of growth, evolution, and this is a spiritual journey because spiritual refers to the mind and consciousness and the experience. I mean, think about it. The most primary thing in our lives is our subjective perceptions. That's our reality. Like we have
That
this
is true.
perceptual reality.
That is true. But the thing is that even through our subjective interactions, that subjective is also an objective reality as well. If
Yeah.
I'm seeing in particular a particular wall that's in front of me, and I'm able to knock into it, and I tell a particular person, "Come and see, touch this wall," and that person is able to do that. We can slowly but surely look empirically that this wall is there. But let's just say, for instance, that I'm seeing a pink rat running on the floor, right? Now, that subjective experience is my own, and I can ask everybody, "Do you see that that's there?" And they're like, "No, I don't see anything." Right? Well, okay, you are having an experience, and nobody could tell you that you're not. But are you having a sane experience, or are you having something that is a hallucination and stuff like that? And how far does this hallucination go until it actually starts becoming a medical issue, such as schizophrenia and
Hmm.
other things like that, right? So that's what I'm trying to look at. Is just that when we look at spiritualism, I don't even think that it's just baggage. I think that because spiritualism is so ambiguous, the word is very ambiguous and means a lot of things to a lot of different people. and it doesn't necessarily have a concrete definition for it and everything, or practices, which I would agree with you. But the one thing that I would also say is that spiritualism in and of itself is based on certain, how could I say it, rituals. Just like how you were stating beforehand, to sit down and to meditate, for
Mhm.
instance, is a ritual. And if you do that on a constant day-to-day basis, that becomes your norm. That becomes your ritual in and of itself, right? And from doing that, that's where it starts to take control of the aspects and ways that you interact with the world which is around you. And then from there, that starts to influence other individuals who are around you as well, who look and say, well, what is that person doing? And stuff like that. And certain times, certain spiritualists or whatever, they just meditate, and people just want to know, what does that meditation do for that person, right? But when we really look at spiritualism in and of itself, it really has that aspect of near death experiences. It has this aspect of transcendency outside the body. It has this perspective that has so much, what I see is so many problems within it, because it doesn't have any evidence to it. It's based on the subjective experiences, and we understand the subjective experiences doesn't at all create to concrete concepts. It just creates the
So
idea within that person's head.
right. So what what you're kind of saying there is that you have a different question. Like you have a different value. Like in spirituality, like I would say the deeper truth of spirituality is not just near death experience, but any experience is ineffable. Like it can't really be explained in words. It can't really be, put in a laboratory setting and measured like that. And it shouldn't be. Like, what's the point in that, anyways? Like, why would we want to do that? And now somebody could say, well, we just want to see what it looks like from a third person's perspective. What does your experience look like from a third person perspective? Okay, my prediction would be basically you would see activity in your body, your brain, or something like that. Big deal. That's not that's not fascinating me because I don't identify with that. I identify with the experience itself. So the important thing about life is what you're experiencing, because if you're not focused on that and you're focused on mainly as a spiritual journey, if you're on your journey in spirituality
Mhm.
and you're mainly focused on, well, when I take a hallucinogen, I feel like I'm coming out of my body. I don't think there's any evidence that I go anywhere. I saw, my father in a vision, and he sent me all this wisdom that is really meaningful to me. It really rang true, and it really applies really well. But you know what? On the other hand, how can I prove any of that really happened? Therefore, that experience is meaningless. It meant nothing to me. Um, that's kind of that's kind of incoherent reasoning to me, because because the whole value of an experience isn't in the explanations. That's the problem religion got into. They tried to say that these experiences are because some Jew on a stick died and floated away and flew to the sky. That's what that means to them, right? Like, no, that's why do you have to ruin it trying to figure out all these attributions rather than just be at peace with what you experience, your gift. You experienced something. It was meaningful to you. It's private, it's personal, it was subjective. There is no proof, you know.
Yeah, I think right
It's
here,
only let me say one thing, it's only
go ahead.
valuable, it would only be valuable if your intention was to brainwash other people.
Right, right. Like right over here, what Linear stated was that, or he could just understand that the experience as a deep moment of introspection and not
Perfect.
related to anything related to spirit or souls.
Bingo.
You're absolutely, seriously, you definitely can state that. But then again, I think the issue that I have, because just like how I stated beforehand, right? Human beings are very in tune to storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yes.
what is the one thing that a lot of people like to do? They have an experience, but they don't keep that experience to themselves. They relinquish that experience to everybody. Oh my God, I saw this person and they were telling me life's answers and everything like that. And people are looking like, okay, what are you talking about? And through there, they want to explain the experience because we are story driven beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem is that when we don't rationally look at the experience that we have and we let that experience go amok or go or take control besides reasoning that said experience, then towards a certain extent we kind of injure ourselves through letting that experience get out of hand. And that's why we need to rein the experience in order to be like, okay, what did I learn from this? Awesome. But is this something that I need to run and hearken to everybody over? Or should I take it as just like how Linear stated, and just like how you stated, as an experience, a subjective experience of me and a learning experience for me, and I leave it with
Right, right, and leave it at that because it's not important. I mean, unless you're having some kind of mental breakdown, like unless you're having, you may be mentally ill. Maybe you're having a episode. Maybe
absolutely.
maybe you're having some neural problem. If you can rule that all out, even if you cannot rule all that out, if the experience was a good thing, I would say just embrace it for what it is, because even I would say even our bad experiences in life
Mhm.
are very meaningful. In fact, the most meaningful experiences that we have in life aren't the getting high off DMT experiences. Some of the most powerful ones, which that's a very powerful experience by the way, but what's also just as powerful are these negative experiences we have. This is our primer for growth. These are the things that give us meaning in how we understand society. For example, and it can be bad or good. It just is what it is.
Hmm.
For example, if if a minority grew up in like an all, white town or whatever,
Mhm.
and he experienced a lot of abuse coming up,
Right.
he may have, it's possible, he may have a particular viewpoint about society and
Oh,
about
big time.
and about the majority and what it's like being a minority. He may have a view that my experience is different than yours,
Oh, big
and that right there provides a meaning. That right there is where meanings derive. There's some sort of dichotomy. There's some sort of,
time.
thing about it that's unique in that experience. And now, an atheist or someone who, if we were to go by your understanding, I think if we were to sort of use that as an analogy to spiritual experiences, you could say, well, you can't prove any of that. It doesn't. Where's the scientific evidence that your feeling about society, blah blah blah, actually is rooted in this thought that people have that you're sort of projecting out, right? And that's a very good question to have. But I think most people, including you or me or anybody else, would just grant them their experience. Like, it's probably true and it has meaning for you, but you can also investigate those situations. Maybe it turns out that there was no racism involved. Maybe it turns out that he was sort of taught this stuff. I mean, all I'm saying is there could be possibly different explanations for the same experience, yet the meaning is still derived. It's sort of it's very powerful nonetheless, and it exists. It's maybe it's not real or exists, but it's impactful. You know.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, well, before I delve in, because I do want to answer or clarify for Linear, because she says I'm a little confused, I guess, with what each of your definitions of spirituality is, simply put. I have had a lot of important experiences and don't consider them spiritual. So, what would you as short as you could, or whatever, but at the same exact time as descriptive as you could. What would be an spiritual experience for you? What would you define a spiritual experience?
Um, I don't know. I pulled
If
up
it's
a
definable.
I pulled up a poem by an astronomer named Rebecca Elson,
Okay.
and she and she wrote this as a description of how she understood it, spirituality.
Okay.
So in this poem, she says, "Sometimes instead I stir myself into a universe still young, still warm as blood. No outer space, just space. The light of all the not yet stars, drifting like a bright mist. All of us and everything already there."
Hmm.
So that's a poem. You can decipher it, but basically the desire to be part of something beyond ourself could simply be a natural affinity for connection. It doesn't necessarily need a supernatural component, but it
Hmm.
is um, an endeavor we could call a spiritual endeavor. Um,
Interesting.
why can't the spiritual experience of oneness be an expanded socio-biology of belonging, for example? Like what we were sort of looking at last night. Like all of that sort of plays a role.
Oh, big time. I think, and I think, or at least for me. Oh, hold on. I think I might have messed up what her question was. One second. Uh, that wasn't really my question. Just spirituality as a noun. Oh shit. Okay, so spirituality as a
It's
noun.
synonymous for me. It's synonymous with um, searching the deeper truths of life. Fundamental truths. Um,
For
so
for me, I think it's experiences that that people put more emphasis on, in a sense. Like it's really hard. Like the only thing that I can do is literally pull up the dictionary definition of it and literally just read it out, because it is very ambiguous.
hmm
It's very ambiguous when we really delve into what spirituality means, and I think it's hard to like define, or it's hard to find words like a noun to
hmm
define it in and of itself. So I think that's where it's difficult, at
It
least.
is because I mean that's how language works. It's like they're just pointers. Like when I say the word tree, I'm talking about this little big wooden brown thing with leaves and branches on it. But the word tree isn't the thing itself. It's just the thing that I'm pointing at. So
Right.
all language falls short as it is. And then on top of it, you got words like God, words like spirituality, words like, these things can be very, you have to ask, you have to
Oh,
understand.
definitely, definitely. And I think that words define meanings of particular things, and I think that through those said wordings, people can get confused because words don't necessarily like
Well, Neil
they're
deGrasse
a
Tyson,
construct of human
yeah,
beings in order to define things, or at
they're
least to
heuristics.
ascribe or prescribe.
Spirituality seems to be a word that's sort of like a heuristic to try to get to some sort of understanding. Like Linear says, finding the deeper truths of life. Isn't that what scientists already try to do? So, I would kind of appeal to Neil deGrasse Tyson,
Mm,
who says, I find that, you know, understanding that we're all stardust, we're made from the great things, the great the stars kind of cooking themselves and creating into these big explosions and supernovas. We're like the offshoot of that. We're like part of the universe as far as, stardust. We're made of all the elements. So, in a way, we are the universe experiencing itself, like Carl Sagan said. And how can you get any more spiritual than that? That's what he said. That was his quote.
right.
So, that's still science, of course, but I would say science is part of life journey. It's part of a spiritual journey. It's all a part of trying to learn about the fundamental truth of reality in the
Mm,
best way you can. Religion has simply monopolized on the word to mean sky daddies and demons and angels and good versus evil and these sort of concepts. But you got to understand there were older spiritual practices, way older than Judaism or Christianity, like say Buddhism or Hinduism, that were much older, you know, and they didn't even necessarily incorporate these gods or, you know, miracles and souls and things like that, you know. So there's different ways that spiritual, depending on the culture that you come
Right.
from.
Right. And but I think like that's the thing that I kind of see, because just like how you stated, words are utilized in order to, towards a certain extent, in order to describe or in order to give meaning to something, and also to give some sort of emotion to something.
Hmm.
And I think that just like how linear states right here, it kind of just seems like you're just, trying to call science and psychology spirituality for some reason. But for me, what I would say towards a certain extent is that I think that because we are emotional creatures, we like using emotional words in order
Hmm.
to describe our circumstances in and of
Hmm.
themselves, right? And by using these emotional words, it gives more of a meaning to the description, or at least more meaning to the subject matter of which you're talking about, right? And I think that a lot of people like to do that in order to give much more oomph for the
Well,
topic.
no, well, there's another side to that too.
Okay.
There's another side to that. Like, there's that, of course, that's like a utilitarian sort of argument. But also, you got to understand, like, the science of consciousness, the
Mm,
science of mind, the science of that sort of stuff.
right.
That's not science, man. That's what scientists do is neurobiology and, you know, brain science.
Yes.
This is understanding the brain and how it correlates to experiences, right?
Hmm.
Spirituality isn't about trying to explain the correlations. Spirituality is about the experiences themselves and what subjective meanings they have and what value they can give your life. Science isn't about that. Science can't you can't look at meaning in a laboratory. You know, you can't take a telescope and find meaning in the universe. Like, you can't do
But
that.
I
That's
think
not
meaning is subjective, and I think that's what you're
very,
trying to
yes.
say,
That's what I'm
right?
trying, exactly
Meaning,
what I'm
meaning
trying
is
to say.
subjective. Okay.
Subjective is one of the most important things in life right now because that's where everything is based on. If you didn't, have you ever heard, you know, I'm sure you have, I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
Okay. What that means
Descartes.
is that before, yeah, Descartes, before there are any inferences, before there are any sort of, well, we can think this way because of the neurons firing, blah, 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 before you make any of these, or God, or any of these other inferences to explain the existence,
Right.
you start off with, I exist. And I know I exist because I'm sitting here experiencing the existence.
Right.
So before the thinking, there is just the amness, you know. The I-ness comes after. That's the thinking part. That's the narrative building part. That's the self and the whole narrative, the psychology. But there's this other thing that's obviously there, and that's the amness. It's what
Right.
it's the in atheistic Platonism, it's called oneness, meaning it's not conscious of anything. It's just there. It's just existence. And that's what you are first. Before the thinking, before all of that is inference and illusion and the hallucination that we're talking about.
But
That's what,
even with the said existence, though, wouldn't you state that existence, or even that said oneness, is basically created through other beings, which are parents and other things like that,
whatever it
through.
is, it doesn't matter. Whatever we want to say it is, that's all part of thinking. That's all part of
Oh,
ego.
yeah, you're right.
You know,
But
what I'm saying is that beyond, before that, before we even get to that part,
we
there's
need to
just,
exist. We need to
Yeah,
exist.
there's
I
just
agree.
existence. It's just a neutral thing. That's who you are. That's what I'm saying. In spiritual terms, you are fundamentally that thing, right? In scientific language, let's call it in scientific language, it's called a quantum field.
Hmm.
Perturbations in the quantum field is how we get, you know, particles to pop into existence, even maybe even universes,
Right.
right? But before any of that, there's just existence. There's just this field of being, right?
Right. Right. Right.
And in scientific language, you might call it a quantum field or a Hilbert space or something like that.
Okay.
In spiritual language, you just call it maybe oneness. You don't want to make it technical. It's just a
Right.
oneness or an
But
amness.
But I think that's what I was trying to state beforehand, right? The wording that we utilize, because we don't want to make it technical, we don't want to make it sound, how could I say it, unfeeling in a sense. So we utilize different language in order to actually give feeling, give emotion
Oh
to the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
wording that
yeah.
we're
Hmm.
trying to state, right? And
Yep.
I think that's the big aspect that maybe I am the when I hear spiritualism or spiritualists speak, for me, it seems to like it rose tints the actual mechanics of what's going on, and I think sometimes it goes even beyond that. What
Right,
it
but
does is
you're
that it,
making the mechanics primary. You're putting the value on the mechanics first. See, that's where I think that we're maybe just a little bit different right now.
okay,
Is that you're looking at, and it's not wrong. It's just perspective.
right,
You're looking at the perspective of, well, it's not really real unless I can measure it, unless I can see it out there, right? And I can measure it out there. What and that's an easy that's what Donald Hoffman calls, what does he call it? The rookie mistake.
right,
Basically, you have to understand all we are is a process of information processing. We're
oh, big time,
processing information.
big time,
So when what we're seeing is our perception of information processing. We're not seeing the information. We're seeing the output of the information after it's been processed, delivered on a plate for us with
yeah, just like the
utensils.
desktop analogy,
Right, like
we're
the
not
desktop.
seeing. Yes,
Right.
I
It's
would
just
say
a useful tool that the brain has for, because if think about it, if we had to keep up with all the calculations and the way that the brain has to manage everything, or plus our bodies, think about our heart, our
oh,
our
big
lungs,
time,
our
big
blood pressure. We couldn't keep up with all that stuff. We couldn't have conscious control of all that stuff
right.
and really survive, right? Like, so I think it's fair to say that our perceptions aren't really what they seem to be. We have a seeming, we engage in a seeming.
Interesting.
So that's where the spiritual teaching comes in to say, it's kind of good to be a little bit humble. We can do theories, but the best theories define their limitations. Like
Yes.
every theory is defined by its limitations. So it says, yeah, gravity works this way, but then Einstein comes along and says, yeah, well, I'll pick up where that limitation left off, and we'll start developing general relativity. And now other folks can look at that theory as, having its limits.
Yeah, but that's the cosmic landscape in and of itself, and being on top of the shoulders of giants,
Of
as
giants,
Isaac
yeah, yeah,
Newton once
exactly.
stated when he was being criticized for plagiarism and
No
stuff like
question.
that. He
No
stated
question.
that, right? Because it's true. A lot of work that has been done by other individuals, as you stated, who commenced that work before them, but they couldn't continue that work because they just didn't have the technology in order to continue that work. And once our technology gets better and the mathematics get better and everything like that, we can slowly start to build upon the works of the other particular individuals that couldn't. So I
I was
completely agree with
and I was just watching the video with Roger Penrose, who is a Nobel Prize laureate,
you. Mhm.
physicist.
Right.
He wrote The
Worked with
Emperor's
Stephen
Mind.
Hawking's as well and
Yeah,
everything.
all
Yeah.
of that. Yeah, very smart physicist, very distinguished, and he basically, he himself was expressing in this particular video, which recorded just a few days ago, And his expression was, what's really great is how, still goes back to how can we, why is the universe rational? Like, why can we reason it, and understand it at all? Like, that's kind of a miracle. Like, even the mathematics Einstein used to form some of the general relativity, that was just obscure mathematics that was shelved 100 years or 200 years earlier before, he actually put it into use.
Oh, big time.
It had no use. It had no application. It was just mathematics that was there. But he picked it and just thought about it and used it and developed his theory, which really does coincide with reality. How does that happen? Like, what is and it's because of our nature. Our consciousness seems to resonate with the world around us. We're all part of the same natural world. We're just simply projecting nature itself onto itself as an experience, and it's local. So it's kind of like we were talking last night. How do these cells know to learn these different what was it, the flatworms you were talking
That's
about?
correct.
Like, over time they learn how to be resilient.
Yes.
And so now they've learned these novel ways of adapting us. They're just so fucking good at
adapting
doing stuff.
to the situation.
To the situation. Now, Roger Penrose, about that, which is funny because I saw his video, his theory is that upon a wave collapse, which is just a fancy way of talking about how reality is observed, how we behave is actually a result of our conscious states being retroactive. Tell me how wild that sounds. So what he's saying is, like, for example, flatworms coming up with novel ideas on how to solve their way out of the problem. He says kind of very similar, only in a mental way. In a cognitive way, it's very comparable to what plants do with photosynthesis. Quantum tunneling is how you reach that energy in order to cause growth, which under classical mechanics, it would take it thousands and thousands of years to figure out how to tunnel that energy into the plant system in order to make it grow. Right? So there's this magical thing called quantum tunneling where it just zips through the wall. The particle just goes through the structure by using the probability distribution, right? So he says sort of the same thing when humans behave, when we react, when we learn things. It's all because it's retro. Now all this, I don't know whether it's true.
Right.
I don't know anything like that. But I'm just saying, this stuff to me sounds very hokey pokey spiritual language to me. I don't know about you.
It's, again, and we can definitely continue this because we do have an after party.
That's right.
Coming up soon at 8:15. But what I do want to state, because you did bring a lot of freaking good points in there, and I want to tackle those points. So everybody, if you really enjoyed this conversation thus far, we have another link that will go to the after party. If you want to join the after party and join the discussion, please do, because we want to have many more people coming in here and actually having this discussion. So if you're a theist, if you're a deist, if you are a polytheist, whatever the situation may be, atheist, a Satanist, whatever you may be, come on through and we'll have a wonderful discussion at that. I'll give a link to the actual, and I'm not sure if it'll actually go through though. Shit. I think I have it right over here. Perfect. So I will share the link. Hopefully I can do perfect. So I'll put it inside the wrong area. I will put it in the chat at the moment just to see what happens. Could you guys click on it? If you guys can't, then I'll try to do it again. If you can, then click on that link and we can go to the other instances. And then from there, I'll send out, or whoever wants to join in to the conversation can join into the conversation. But before we go, please, if you like this channel, hit that like and hit that subscribe button because it really helps us out. If you want to join our Discord, check out below in the description because we got our Discord down there. And if you want to help us out on Patreon, that would be freaking fantastic. That is also in the description down below. So, without any further ado, hold on, we'll mostly lurk since I have errands to run. That's perfectly fine. You can definitely lurk. And if you have any questions or anything pops up, just hit it up on your phone or on your internet or whatever you're on, and we will be there. So, without further ado, I need to thank Scott Williamson so much for actually having this discussion because this was a fantastic discussion like I knew it would be.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to continue the discussion on the after party. So I will see you all there. Have a great night and see you relatively soon. Alrighty. Later. Hold on. Word. I forgot to do the little out.